Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. We've just seen a major victory for Takaichi Sanae, a hardline conservative poised to be Japan's first female prime minister. She promises a bracing new era. But given Japan's institutional restraints and staggering national debt, and considering her ruling party is currently navigating a political crisis, how much can one leader, even a history-making Iron Lady, truly reshape the country's core trajectory?
That really is the central question, isn't it? Takaichi Sanae secured the LDP leadership on October 4th, 2025. She won that runoff against Koizumi Shinjiro. And what makes this win so critical isn't just who won, it's the crisis surrounding the party she inherits. After these recent elections, marred by scandals, struggles with living costs, the LDP and its coalition partner, they're ruling with a minority in both chambers. That's the first time in the party's history.
Yeah, that context changes everything. I mean, the LDP leadership contest itself was held under the banner #ChangeLDP. And Takaichi's victory certainly delivered ideological change. For her conservative base, this is the affirmation they wanted. But we've seen a lot of commentary, haven't we, both inside and outside the party, suggesting this signals an ominous rightward lurch, that Japan's sort of joining this global trend towards, polarizing nationalistic culture warrior politics.
Oh, it's absolutely an ideological triumph from that perspective. Koizumi was seen as the pragmatic choice, right? Advocating for a big tent approach to steady the ship. But the party lawmakers, the rank-and-file members, they ultimately chose Takaichi's very muscular, very conservative vision. So this isn't just politics. It feels like a deep endorsement of the LDP's right wing.
Let's unpack the symbolism for a second, because it's fascinatingly contradictory. Takaichi is the LDP's first female leader. That's huge, monumental in a political system where female representation really lags behind other OECD nations. Yet she doesn't come from a political dynasty. Her background, daughter of a salaryman and a police officer, and maybe slightly unbelievably for a hardline traditionalist, her youth involved playing drums in a heavy metal band and being a motorcycle enthusiast.
It definitely speaks to her political tenacity, doesn't it? That non-establishment background makes her story quite compelling. But her political identity, well, it's anything but flexible. She openly models herself after Margaret Thatcher, the original Iron Lady. And crucially, her real mentor was the late Abe Shinzo. He essentially anointed her as the flag bearer for the right wing. So this win really solidifies the legacy and maybe the policy framework of that Abe faction within the LDP.
Okay, so if Abe is the mentor figure, what does her specific policy blueprint actually look like? How is this bracing new era supposed to function?
Well, her agenda seems to rest on 4 quite strong pillars, and they really echo Abe's core missions. First, there's the economics. She promises Abenomics redux, a clear commitment to expansionary fiscal and monetary policies. Her view is pretty stark. Fiscal prudence is less important than growth. And to drive that growth, she famously pledged to work, and essentially abandon any idea of work-life balance for policymakers.
Right, work. And that aggressive economic stance seems mirrored in her security posture, too.
Absolutely. She favors a significant strengthening of Japanese armed forces, and she's determined to complete Abe's mission on constitutional revision, specifically redefining Japan's self-defense forces. The mantra seems to be peace through strength, sending that signal that, Japan is back.
And then there are the culture and history elements, which seem deeply intertwined.
Yes, second and third pillars, you could say. She is a staunch social conservative, and this is where her policies really clash with modernizing forces in Japan. She opposes 2 key issues often seen as bellwethers for gender equality, giving married couples the legal right to keep separate surnames and allowing female succession in the imperial line.
And on history, she shares Abe's revisionist views,
Right.
Promoting pride in traditions and history.
Exactly. And the big friction point, the one that always comes up, is her history of regular visits to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine. That shrine commemorates Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals. If she continues that practice while in office, well, it would almost certainly strain ties with Seoul and Beijing severely.
Okay, and finally, foreign policy. The U.S. alliance.
So on foreign policy, she acknowledges the alliance with America is the cornerstone of security. That sort of pragmatic baseline, you have to say that. But interestingly, she has also suggested Japan might need to renegotiate that massive, rather vague tariff and investment agreement struck during the Trump era. We're talking about a deal that already commits Japan to a huge U.S.-bound investment package. Officials estimated around, $550 billion? Challenging that. Well, that's a high-risk move, especially with the U.S. relationship.
That is definitely an aggressive, quite muscular slate of policies across the board. But this brings us back to that crucial question, and maybe this is where we really dig in. Can Takaichi's ideological agenda actually translate into deliverable policy, especially given she won by positioning herself so clearly on the right?
Well, this is it. The foiling of this victory as just a sharp rightward lurch, it sort of risks confusing her ambition with her actual ability to govern. What really stands out to me when you look closely is how Japan's institutional framework is set up. The parliamentary math, the necessity of the coalition, the macroeconomic constraints, they all tend to sand down the sharpest edges of any radical agenda.
Okay, let's start with the most basic constraint, the cold, hard parliamentary reality. She leaves a minority government.
Precisely. I mean, look at her flagship security policy, constitutional revision. That requires not just a simple majority, it needs 2/3 approval in both houses of the Diet, plus a national referendum. With the LDP holding less than half the seats in the lower house right now, that goal is, frankly, politically impossible in the near term. It forces her hand, really. She has to focus more on accelerating policies already in motion, maybe, rather than initiating grand constitutional changes from scratch.
And any move she makes has to satisfy her partner as well. This brings in the complexities of Japanese political mechanics, right?
Yeah.
The coalition veto power.
Absolutely vital. The LDP might be a broad church internally, but the coalition with Komeito is essential for basic survival. She has to contend with Komeito. They've been the dovish partner securing the LDP's majority for, what, a quarter century now? Komeito draws its base mainly from the Buddhist Soka Gakkai movement, which has a deeply pacifist history. So Komeito effectively holds veto power over those hard-edged security policies she might favor, and also over social policies like the surname issue or imperial succession that clash with their more, let's say, progressively inclined base.
So for you, the listener, the immediate insight isn't necessarily to just focus on Takaichi's public speeches, her rhetoric, but maybe look more closely at the mechanics of coalition management, who gets appointed to key committee chairs, especially moderate leaders, because that's where the power to actually block change often resides.
Exactly. And if you connect this to the economic picture, the constraints become even clearer. Abenomics redux, as a policy, faces a completely different environment today than it did back in 2013 when Abe first launched it. Back then, Japan was battling severe deflation. Massive fiscal stimulus was, well, generally accepted as necessary.
But 2025 is different. Why are markets likely to be less tolerant of a fiscal bazooka this time around?
Because we're now firmly in a new global inflationary era. It's a different world. That means borrowing costs in Japan, which were near zero for years, are finally starting to rise. If Takaichi tries to launch massive, untargeted stimulus now, bond markets will likely react quickly, demanding higher yields. And this runs straight into the Bank of Japan's independence. The BOJ is already under pressure, trying to navigate its own exit from years of ultra-loose monetary policy, this normalization process. Any attempt by the prime minister to strong-arm the BOJ into printing more money could very easily trigger market instability. So expecting some huge, non-targeted fiscal expansion, probably unrealistic.
So instead, we should probably anticipate measures that are much more targeted. Things focused on specific sectors, maybe energy security, support for families struggling with inflation, or perhaps boosting the defense industrial base. Rather than just a return to that kind of blanket spending we saw in the last decade, the economic reality itself acts as a powerful check here.
I think that's right. And the defense policy is another good example of how these constraints work in practice. While she's personally very hawkish, Japan's actual operational security policy is already on a multi-year track. That was decided by the previous administration, committing to 2% of GDP defense spending, achieving counter-strike capability. Those things are already baked in. Wholesale shifts in that trajectory are pretty unlikely without Komeito's explicit cover. What Takaichi can do is maybe accelerate the implementation of those existing policies at the margins, but the core direction seems quite fixed for now.
Okay, so the first few months, say the first 90 to 180 days, seem absolutely crucial then. For the world to gauge whether it's the ideology or the pragmatism that wins out, what are the key early litmus tests, the things that will reveal her true governing style?
Well, the very first signal is always the cabinet formation. Always. Will she strictly reward the hardliners who backed her in the leadership race? That might placate her base, but it risks alienating Komeito and the LDT moderates. Or will she show governing breadth? Balance those appointments with more coalition-friendly moderates, particularly in those key posts. Defense, foreign affairs, and the really critical chief cabinet secretary role. That cabinet composition tells you her immediate priorities: ideological purity or political survival.
And there's a major historical flashpoint arriving almost immediately, isn't there? The Yasukuni Shrine's Autumn Festival starts on October 17th.
Yes, a visit by Takaichi to Yasukuni as prime minister would be, well, a seismic event diplomatically. It would instantly spike tensions with Seoul and Beijing. It would likely consume all diplomatic bandwidth for months. And crucially, it would immediately complicate, maybe even torpedo, that very difficult Japan-South Korea rapprochement we've seen gaining some momentum recently. It's an easy symbolic win for the hard right base, perhaps, but it carries immense geopolitical cost.
And that leads straight into international negotiations because Donald Trump is expected to visit Tokyo on October 27th.
Right, another massive high-stakes moment very early on. Any effort by Takaichi to try and reopen the fine print of that Trump-era tariff agreement, maybe try to secure some favorable carve-outs or side letters, that will really reveal her negotiating mettle or lack thereof. She'll be tested immediately by a pretty tough U.S. environment. And if she can't handle that relationship delicately, it could jeopardize Japan's cornerstone security alliance.
Domestically, she also has to walk a kind of knife's edge on the economy, doesn't she? How she sequences fiscal support, her promised growth focus, alongside the Bank of Japan's ongoing efforts at tightening, at normalization. That's going to demonstrate pretty quickly whether she prioritizes her political messaging on growth or actual market stability.
And finally, there's the risk of domestic polarization. This is a big one. By pulling the LDP so sharply to the right, particularly on social and historical issues, Takaichi risks widening the fissures within her own party. Some political analysts are already warning that this hard-right pivot could ultimately imperil that crucial LDP alliance with Komeito. And if Komeito were ever to exit the coalition, well, the LDP would face a potentially disastrous snap election, one it seems ill-prepared to fight right now, that could conceivably even hasten the collapse of the party itself, according to some commentators.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Well, Takaichi's victory is undoubtedly symbolically historic. Japan gets its first potential female prime minister. But her ultimate challenge might not be rallying her conservative base. It's more likely going to be handling that delicate coalition-building process within Japan's very firm institutional constraints. She's risen largely through ideological purity, you could argue, but she may quickly find herself hemmed in by parliamentary reality, facing the risk of significant polarization while lacking the actual power to push through her most hardline policies.
That's right. And despite the powerful symbolism of Japan potentially electing its first female PM, the stark reality is that the country's female representation in top political roles still lags the entire OECD, significantly. So maybe the provocative question for you to consider is this. Will Takaichi's rise genuinely help improve that thin pipeline for women in Japanese politics? Will it break down institutional gender norms at lower levels? Or will these representation gains kind of stall only at the very, very top while the systemic barriers for women across the diet and in wider politics remain firmly in place?
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs. And don't forget to like, comment, and share.